The 1917 Silent Parade. Hope you remember that one. In 1917, African Americans marched in New York City silently to protest this then epidemic type of extrajudicial capital punishment. Dave.
What is lynching?
Right.
Parade for 800.
Thousands marched from 57th Street to 23rd Street down this numeric Manhattan Avenue and famous parade route. Dave.
What is Fifth Avenue?
That's it.
Silent Parade, 1200.
One of the first major civil rights demonstrations, the parade was organized by this rights organization founded in 1909. Dave.
What's the NAACP?
Correct.
Silent Parade, 1600.
Paraders carried the flags of the United States, Britain, Haiti, and this West African country. Dave.
What is Liberia?
Yes.
Yesterday marked the 102nd anniversary of the second ever public black protest in the United States, and one of the most famous, the Silent Parade. The demonstration involving 10,000 African Americans was in response to riots in East St. Louis, Illinois earlier that month, in which up to 250 black citizens were killed and thousands were left homeless by attacks from white mobs. NAACP Field Secretary James Weldon Johnson organized the protest with local church leaders and community organizers. Demonstrators marched from 57th Street down to 23rd Street, bearing signs decrying acts of violence against African Americans nationwide. While the Silent Parade did not result in much action from the government to curb racial violence and oppression, media coverage of the march helped to portray the NAACP and African American activists at large in a more positive light than they had ever been before.
The 1917 race riots, which occurred in East St. Louis, are one of those absolutely tragic, horrible, awful events that continue, I think, to compound our history.
And to this day, they are still considered the worst race riots the nation has ever seen.
They started with a strike at a company called the Aluminum Ore Company. And it was strikes by primarily white workers, but the company began to hire African Americans as replacement workers.
Tensions between whites and blacks in East St. Louis had been growing even before the strike, as more and more African Americans migrated north looking for work. But on the evening of July 2nd, it boiled over. Mobs began setting fire to African American homes. There were random shootings and beatings. Even women participated in the attacks.
Hundreds of people died, depending on whose accounts you look at, but several hundred at least, mostly African American.
The end of the riots brought the beginning of several investigations, with perhaps the most shocking revelation that some of the militiamen brought in to restore peace actually participated in the attacks. Outrage spread across the country. 3 weeks after the end of the riots, 10,000 African Americans marched down New York City's Fifth Avenue in silent protest.
It's a set of events that are remembered well by African American residents of the region because the tradition has been passed down, and something that most white people would rather forget and have.
At the peak of the riots, thousands of black families fled East St. Louis by crossing the Eads Bridge into St. Louis, but eventually most went back. Decades later, of course, it would be the whites who decided to flee, but they never returned.